Hello everyone, I hope you're enjoying the student showcase so far. In the spirit of today's theme, Year of Transformation, I'm going to talk about transforming the OHP student onboarding experience. My name is Katherine Mercieca, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a soon-to-be graduate of the Higher Education Master's Program at the School of Education. And over the past year or so, I have been an Online Student Services Fellow with the OHP team. So I've been working very closely with Roderick to think about online student services for our online hybrid programs. And I've also been a Learning Experience Design student resident. So I've been very busy with CAI over the past several months. In addition to, my experience in the master's program and my student service or my student fellow work, I also come from a student affairs and training and development background. So having the student affairs piece as well as the learning experience design training that I've gotten as part of the graduate certificate program, this positioned me really well to start thinking about the onboarding course experience for our OHP students. Now, I think it's important before we move forward to define what is onboarding. Essentially, it's a process of acclimating an individual to a group or an institution. This typically happens over time, and it involves learning the written and the unwritten rules of that group or that institution. Now, typically in a higher education context, we talk about this process as orientation, and you might think of this as new student orientation, where we bring students to campus and we teach them about the institution and the different resources and programs that are offered. So what's the difference between onboarding versus orientation? Well, again, onboarding is typically a process that happens over an extended period of time, whereas orientation is typically a one-time event. And being honest, right now, a lot of our onboarding practices actually look a little bit more like orientation. But we're hoping to move forward thinking about how we might turn this into more of an onboarding process. But for the sake of consistency and for the sake of aspiration, I'm going to refer to my work here as onboarding. Now, what do student affairs professionals typically do when they onboard new students? It's, again, typically more of an orientation experience, and it's what I call a information dump. So we throw a lot of information at students about campus resources, policies, procedures, etc. And it can be a very overwhelming learning experience because you're not just learning this information, you're getting to know your peers, you're taking placement exams, especially for undergraduates, you're doing academic advising and course selection during this orientation experience. And when I set out to do this project, I had a lot of this in mind, and my initial steps for designing an onboarding course for the OHP team and the online hybrid programs as part of our portfolio, I started researching best practices for onboarding students to online learning and online programs. Then I wanted to create an adaptable course shell that any academic unit could take and adapt for their individual needs. And those course modules would live in a learning management system. I built it out in Canvas, but it could certainly be translated into another system like Coursera. But so far I've focused on the what of what we typically do and what I wanted to do. Now I'm going to focus on the why. Why do we do onboarding? Why is this an accepted and good practice within higher education? There's a lot of reasons why we do this, but I think it's important to define the why because those are the goals that we're designing this learning experience around effectively. So we typically do onboarding to build community, help connect students to the institution, to faculty, to staff, and to each other. We do onboarding to help students learn how to use the learning management system and other educational technology, especially in online learning, so students can learn this part early on so they can focus on the content and then using that educational technology. We do onboarding to familiarize students with those institutional resources and opportunities so they can take advantage of all of those opportunities. And at the end of the day, we do onboarding to help students prepare themselves for success. And of course, while we really want students to be these independent learners with a lot of self-efficacy, after I was looking into the research, I realized even if this is true, online graduate students still really need help getting through their graduate programs. And I did try to focus on online learners in a graduate context, although some did focus on undergraduate learning. And a lot of what we can do is help them through complex and holistic advising. Students also really benefit from the opportunity to think metacognitively about their learning, about the skills and behaviors that they need to be successful in online programs. And this was something that I took very seriously in the course design. And I also wanted to make it interactive and also give students an opportunity to connect with their peers because they find that really valuable in supporting their learning. Now, these are just a few examples of some of the Canvas modules I built. I did find a lot of opportunities for connecting students to faculty and their peers and other staff. That could be through discussion boards, creating a slide deck where you have your own little profile and you can flip through and see other students' profiles. And I also recommended creating messages from students and alumni so students can see themselves as part of the program or as graduates of the program. I also created some reading and reflection prompts for students to start thinking about what are their personal goals, how are they going to achieve work-life balance when they're graduate students and possibly full-time workers or parents or spouses or whatever other opportunities they're juggling along with being a Michigan student. And while I didn't work specifically in Gamut, I had Gamut in my mind because I think this is a great opportunity to start thinking about how we can embed our own software into the onboarding experience or into some of our online and hybrid programs. And when I was thinking about making interactive learning opportunities, I did a software sort of demo about teaching students how to use Zoom, if for some reason they don't know how to do that by now. But I didn't just make a typical, reading piece. I made a little scavenger hunt because I thought that would just make it more fun and interactive. And then once I designed everything and I was very happy with the final product, things got more complicated, as they often do. So we were exploring some of the other programs in our portfolio and realized there are actually several that are very what we call high touch. They have a lot of resources available. They often bring students to campus or have a very heavy synchronous portion. It might even be for credit in the case of a School of Social Work's onboarding experience. And having a very asynchronous course shell wasn't really all that, maybe not necessarily all that useful, but it wasn't quite as adaptable. And I was worried that we weren't really thinking through, is this going to be fit for high touch and low touch? Or are we actually heading towards a one-size-fits-all approach? And that's really not what I wanted to do. So my design challenge in the past several months has been, how do we make the onboarding experience more flexible while still ensuring that we embed our research-informed practices and values into future onboarding experiences, while also still not getting rid of all of the work that I did in Canvas, because it can definitely still be used. And for me, that also meant thinking through a consultation process design. So thinking about how are we going to work with our academic units to design an onboarding experience going forward, or even adapting online onboarding experiences. Where are those touch points with the academic unit that we can start having those conversations, and how does the design process actually work specifically for the online student services portion of things? So this was the sketch that I came up with to start thinking through that timeline initially. And really the conversations begin at the OHP kickoff meeting, where we start to get to know each other. We maybe identify the person in charge of the onboarding experience within the academic unit and then connect them to the student services program manager, i.e. Roderick. And then we start thinking about onboarding. We're not necessarily starting the design process in the kickoff meeting because there's a lot of conversations that need to happen, but it's still definitely something we just to start thinking about. And then we're going to have a separate student services kickoff meeting where we do connect with the unit specifically about onboarding and other student services issues. And we'll start introducing our goals and must-haves. We'll maybe even think about introducing our online portfolio and integrating that into a longer onboarding experience, or maybe identifying those modules that would be better at a later point, maybe not necessarily in that first initial orientation experience. And then in this kickoff, we start to assess how much support are they actually going to need when they're designing the onboarding course, because some might need a little bit more support. Maybe they're not as familiar with designing orientation experiences. Maybe they're very proficient in this, or they already have something built out. And at this point, we're not doing a whole lot of consulting. Maybe we're doing a little bit more editing and giving some feedback and advice. Or maybe we land somewhere in the middle. And the high effort, medium effort, low effort designation is really just to help us think through how are we going to spend our time, and also what kind of conversations are we going to be having, because it could look very different from unit to unit. And then we will have a follow-up meeting with the Student Services Program Manager to review the design of the onboarding course, provide those suggestions, and maybe even some of those Canvas modules that I designed. And then, after those meetings, it's going to be follow-up as needed, thinking about future iterations, adapting the consultation and onboarding experience to our experience and needs as they come up, and then really just ongoing relationship building with the academic unit. So that's where things currently stand. We are, definitely going to need to flesh this out a little bit more. Eventually, we're going to want to create an assessment plan to make sure we're doing onboarding effectively. implement the consultation model, and then maybe think about other ways to engage with our software, or think about other learning experiences that we could create, maybe in GatherTown, or somehow maybe even leverage XR in terms of onboarding. So thank you all for taking the time to listen to my presentation. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and go Blue.